When witches go riding and black cats are seen, the moon laughs and whispers, 'tis near Halloween. If you like to learn, but lack enough time to locate the reason or translate the rhyme, with magical knowledge from ancient tomes on the shelf, I bring Halloween topics to Geek Thyself. Hello everyone, I'm Heather and I'll be your host for this podcast. Halloween is my favorite holiday and my favorite spooky time of the year, so park your broom at the door and listen for a spell as I brew up some Halloween topics for this week and the rest of October. Welcome back, everyone.
Hi guys, we're doing more of the spoops.
Yes.
Still in October, some more spoops. This is how
Exactly. All of Halloween month. Yes, that's correct. It is Halloween month, as I like to call it. So every week we're talking about something that's a little bit Halloween related or perhaps a little spooky.
Like this week. This week is a spoopy.
Yes, this week is a spoopy. So this week I am taking lead because this is something I wanted to talk about. Anyone
like I took lead with films. This is kind of your turf, but yes. I know a little bit about it, and I am the questioner here.
Yes.
This is.
So we're going to be talking about a spooky treasure hunt. So for anyone who's listened to any of the previous episodes, you've probably figured out that I'm a little bit of a history nerd. Just a tad. Just a little, yeah. And so recently I started watching a docu-series on Netflix called The Curse of Oak Island. Now, to be clear, this episode we're doing right now is not about the TV show, though it was inspired by it, because that got me wondering more about what exactly is the history of this place and what's going on. So even the main origin story that's told of how this all started is a little spooky. The story goes that back in 1795, 3 teenage boys, and there's slightly different variations of this story, but the one that's spooky that I'm focusing on, and the one that they focus on in the TV show, is that these 3 teenage boys, David McGinnis, John Smith, and Anthony Vaughan, were in the area of Oak Island in Nova Scotia off the coast of Canada in the Atlantic Ocean. And it's an island that's not very far from the mainland. It's only about 600 something feet, couple hundred yards from the mainland. So they were able to take a boat across, but they saw these strange lights over on Oak Island. And they went to investigate because they were curious what it was. And there were rumors about pirates and stuff in the area, so why these 3 teenage boys thought that would be smart, who knows? But they decided to go investigate the creepy lights.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to point out, teenage boys.
You know, that's fair. That's fair. So these 3 boys decided to go check it out. They followed the lights, or at least what they thought was the path of the lights, through the trees, and they got to this gigantic oak tree. And when they looked up, Daniel McGinnis, who was like the son of a carpenter family, looked up and saw signs on the tree of it being used like with pulleys and things like that. Saw marks he recognized and saw an actual pulley hanging down off of one of the limbs of the tree. And where the boys were standing, they noticed a depression in the dirt. As if perhaps...
Like a trap?
No, as if perhaps something had been buried there and then the dirt settled.
Okay, I'm with you. Okay.
So that kind of like a depression in the ground. And so they started digging. And they kept digging. And as they dug down...
Like with their hands?
Well, they came back with tools.
Okay.
They might have started with their hands, but they eventually came back with tools.
Smart boys.
They started digging, and they started to find a few things. One of the things they found that was very strange is that they dug down about 10 feet or so, roughly 10 feet, and they found a bunch of wooden planks that had been, and supports of some kind that had been laying across like a floor. Some variations of the story say that instead of actual planks, they just saw signs every 10 feet of some kind of work having been done to create like a tunnel of some kind.
Right. Okay.
And every 10 feet down, they found another platform. And they kept going and going and going. And along the way, the story goes that they did find occasional bits and pieces of treasure as they were going. So they kept digging. And this big pit that they dug on the island became known as the Money Pit. The original Money Pit. Yeah. Over time, they started buying land on the island so that they could protect their claim. And one interesting thing, actually, is that in the third season of the TV show, which is the one I just watched, the direct descendants of Daniel McGinnis came back to the island. Three women, three sisters came back to the island to show the brothers in the TV show that are treasure hunting a family heirloom, which was a very, very, very old-looking gold cross that they'd had a jeweler look at before and had told them that it was roughly 500 years old, based off what the jeweler thought. They didn't do testing, just the jeweler looking at it thought it was roughly 500 years old.
So about 1600s then?
15 to 1600s, yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah. So it'd been buried there for maybe 200 years before the family found it, basically.
Right. And their story, the sisters said that the cross had been handed down from father to son throughout their family, and when their brother died, he gave it to them and told them to never let it out of their sight and protect it, because it was the family heirloom, basically. And their family story was that Daniel McGinnis and his two friends found 3 treasure chests, and each family took one. That's the story they were always told. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that 100 or so years ago, there also started to be talk of a curse on the island, because whoever buried things, whoever created the original platforms that Daniel McGinnis and his friends found, booby-trapped everything.
Okay.
So,
like post them digging it up?
No. Like, when it was built, it was booby-trapped when they built it.
Oh. So, were the boys just incredibly lucky not to set anything off?
Well, so the booby trap wasn't that kind of a booby trap. It was very, very well built, but also very strange. So what happened is, over the years, technology improved slightly and they needed money. So the 3 boys did partner with some other treasure seekers to get more funding and keep digging and digging and digging the tunnel. And they got down all the way to 90 feet. And every 10 feet there was a platform, just like the first one they'd found. At 90 feet, the platform they found had a rock on it, like a stone plaque, that had very, very weird symbols carved into it, symbols that no one recognized.
Weird.
And as soon as they picked up that plaque and removed it, as soon as they removed the rock, the tunnel flooded with water.
Damn.
And they discovered that there was a flood tunnel by intersecting with the tunnel they had been digging down.
Huh.
And later, another group of explorers sort of followed the line of where that tunnel went to one of the coves on the island called Smith's Cove. And at Smith's Cove, they started digging around and they found box drains. So basically, it's sort of like ancient Roman aqueduct type of style drains that had been put into that cove to put water into the money pit.
Damn.
And whoever put it there covered those drains with something called eelgrass, which is like grass that grows on the bottom of the ocean in that area.
Like seaweed kind of thing?
It's seagrass, basically. a type of seagrass, but they used eelgrass to protect the drains so they wouldn't clog up, and then covered the eelgrass with coconut husk. And because the coconut husk would help filter out the dirt and stuff, so that the water could flow into them, but they wouldn't fill up with dirt and clog.
That's incredibly sophisticated for 1700s.
Well, it's pre-1700s.
Oh yeah, because that's when they found it.
Because that's when they found it. And then the whole thing was covered over with dirt and rocks again. So someone not only built whatever platforms or structure that the boys found and started digging down, but they also booby-trapped it so that it would flood with water. And there's no way that those box drains were just an accident. Someone had to have put them there purposely.
Which kind of suggests that when you get that far down, there's more treasure.
Exactly.
Which they're actually protecting.
Exactly. And that is why there are so many people who have speculations on who did it, where they buried it, why they did it, like all these kinds of things. There's so many different theories. Even just in the one season of the show that I watched, I think they had like 10 different people come in and give them different theories on what's buried on the island. The one thing they all agree on is that there's definitely something buried on the island, and every time someone seems to be getting close, it seems like something always happens that derails it.
Really?
Yeah, and it's not always major. There is a supposed curse or legend that says that the treasure won't be found until 7 men have lost their lives, or until 7 people have died. So far, 6 have. There was an unknown worker.
Okay. While you're looking at your notes, just a quick question: like, where did this legend come from?
I wasn't able to find a source of the legend about the deaths.
Yeah, because that seems like a pretty big thing that's just come out of nowhere a little bit.
Yeah, I wasn't able to find a specific source for that. I did look, and I didn't see where it came from. So it might just kind of be one of those things where people started joking about it, and then it became the curse.
Like urban legends that become entrenched in actual history. Yeah, okay. Either way, it seems very interesting.
Here we go. Okay, and like I said, there's slight variations of how old the boys were, what exactly they found that led them to start digging, but all accounts agree they started digging, they found stuff, and then over the years more and more people went to look and dig and try to find stuff. So the earliest excavations happened in the late 1790s, which is when it was supposedly first found, and they started looking through it. At the time, they thought that the gold, the depression and the hiding and everything of the gold was potentially consistent with the story of Captain Kidd, the story of a pirate at the time. And then they kept digging and, like I said, flooded with the seawater. Okay, where did it go? I'm trying to find the names. I know the name of the person. There it is. Okay. So in terms of deaths, there was an unknown one very early on.
Yeah, no one work, you said.
Yeah, no one knows who the person is. And then, unfortunately, in the late 1950s and 1960s, there were 4 deaths all at once.
Okay, so that was a fairly big accident.
Yeah, so over the years, no big surprise, treasure hunting. There have been lots of people who've gone to the island and tried to find the hidden treasure. And there's a million different theories on what the treasure could be, who hid it there, where it's hidden. This island is not that big, and yet there's somehow millions and millions of ideas of where exactly everything could be hidden. And there's one of the things that was weird about the island also is that there were a lot of strange stone markings. Not far from where the money pit was, there were found stones very heavy big stones that were laid out in a triangle. And the point of the triangle pointed directly north at the money pit. And they were laid out in such a way where it was like this didn't just happen, someone placed these here kind of situation.
Right. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And there were other things. There's a few stones around the island that look like they've clearly been drilled or worked at in some way. But they were found that way. It's not like the people coming to the island treasure hunting randomly drilled a stone. They were just found that way already.
That's a bit intriguing because of how early on it would have been. Like, to actually drill into it, that would have been manual.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have had to have been. One of the many theories is that perhaps some Roman involvement. We do know that the Roman Empire stretched very far, and also like the Carthaginians were known for being amazing sailors, so it's not impossible that they could have traveled up towards Nova Scotia and ended up in that area.
And it uses their sewering system as a booby trap.
Something very similar to it, yeah.
Yeah. So that's an interesting theory.
So unfortunately, though, of course, people were very, very interested in finding it, and equipment was not as good then as it is now. So there's been several famous people who made some minor discoveries of a few little artifacts, things like, an axe or an anchor, nothing insane, but one of the more famous is Gilbert Hedden, who has a tunnel that has recently been rediscovered, and he was digging near the money pit. His tunnel that he dug actually intersected into the money pit above the water, so there was hope of possibly accessing things below the flood through there. And then the deaths that I mentioned, unfortunately, during the 1959 to 1966 excavations of Robert Restall and Robert Dunfield. Robert Restall took his whole family with him. It was his family. Oh, no. They didn't all pass away, thankfully, but it was him and his son and his wife and daughter all moved to Oak Island, and he went treasure hunting. He caught the fever, just like so many people before him, and wanted to go investigate. Unfortunately...
Okay. When you said he caught the fever, I was like, what fever?
Gold fever.
Okay, I'm with you now. It's like, I know there was a curse, but is the fever part of the curse?
Yeah, so...
okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, his team, on August 17th in 1959, met with tragedy. One of the tunnels they were working in filled with hydrogen sulfide fumes. So toxic fumes. So he passed away down there. His son went down to try to find him and also lost consciousness. And then after that happened, three of their other workers, went down and tried to save them. Unfortunately, they didn't all make it back out. One of the workers was rescued by another person who happened to be nearby. He was able to get him out. But
so 2 rescuers, the son and the father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Robert Restall Sr. and Robert Restall Jr. And then a man named Gracer and Cyril Hiltz all died. And there is a memorial on the island to everyone who's died in the search for the treasure.
Okay. So that's 5 so far. There's the one on its own, there's the 4. Was the one in between the 2?
Oh, that's right. I did miss one. So it was in 1896. It was the second
in between the 2.
Yeah, in between the 2. It was the second accidental death. It was March 26th of 1897. A worker named Maynard Kaiser fell to his death. Unfortunately, what happened is when they were pulling, this is another one of the things that people use to say that like it's cursed if you get too close. They were pulling the basket back up that he was in from the pit, and the rope snapped.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
with no warning. They the rope had been fine all day, no problems, didn't even seem frayed, and then it snapped.
And so that was before it flooded, because it flooded after they found the deep bit.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so those are 6 deaths, and essentially, so it's been about 70 years since the last death?
Roughly, yeah.
So, if the legend is 7, why are people tempting fate with that? I mean, I guess people want the treasure, but yeah, it's the treasure. Yeah, I get that. So, speaking of treasure, that's the thing we'll talk about a bit more when we maybe get back from the break.
Mm-hmm.
All right, sounds like a plan.
All right, hi everyone. Welcome to our spooky mid-roll.
Ooh, so spooky.
So I'm going to start off by talking about World Anvil. If you would like to build your very own creepy, spooktastic world, then World Anvil is the most amazing tool. It's full of a lot of wonderful technological hocus pocus that will let you build a world that is very fleshed out and create all sorts of magical wiki-like connections between your different write-ups of characters and places and items in the world. It's the most robust world building tool that we have ever found here at Nerdsmith. It's an amazing program, amazing website, worldanvil.com. They actually won an Emmy for being an amazing world building and management tool. We can't talk about them enough, not to mention the fact that everyone over there is absolutely amazing and fantastic. Janet, one of the owners, is actually even on a show here at Nerdsmith called Shattered Forge, and she's just a lot of fun. Can't say how much we love them because it would just take the entire rest of this episode to do that. So you should go check them out at worldanvil.com.
Yes. Okay, and also, with all the games that we play involving dice, we of course are best friends with Castle Die Hard at Die Hard Dice.
Yes.
They create amazing polymer and metal dice with all kinds of finishes, all kinds of colours. Their dual colour series are absolutely gorgeous. They've got their own unique metal dice which they create the molds for, along with their own new acrylic dice, with their purple moonstone and the blue moonstone they have as well. I can't wait to see what they come out with next because it's always beautiful.
Yeah.
They have the Scroll of Rolling, which we keep mentioning because it's amazing. It's a portable dice box. Who doesn't need that? Every dungeon master needs it, is what the answer to that question is.
Yes,
and that's great because if you're a dungeon master and you want one of these things, because of course you do, because you can roll dice on the go, you can go to Die Hard Dice right now and use the code Geek Thyself and get 15%, that's 15 off your first or next order, because they're just that lovely.
Yes.
So feel free to use that code on all of your dice clicky clacky desires.
Yes, excellent.
Just don't get quite as many as Tessa did, because then you might not have any money.
Right. Although you'll have saved some with the 15% off, and then you get to have.
You'll have more money than that, but.
And you get the lovely ASMR of the clickety clackety math rocks.
Yeah, math rocks. They're great. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to roll with the best, all you need to do is go to dieharddice.com.
All right, and with that, let's get into some of the theories of Oak Island's hidden treasure.
Ooh.
Okay, so the theories are where things really get crazy.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to hear all these theories, because if they've got a whole series with new theories on every episode, there's got to be loads of theories. And you said, how big was this island? It was less than a mile long, wasn't it?
Let me pull up the exact dimensions for you. It is not a very big island. You would
it can't be.
You would really expect it to be bigger. It's only 140 acres.
Oh wow. So, okay, a little bit over a mile, but that's still not a lot at all.
No, it's not a large island by any means. It really isn't.
I don't suppose like there are any sort of occupied people who live on it.
There are actually. Well, I don't know that they live there year-round.
Whether at the time like it was discovered? Sorry.
There were people who lived on it at the time it was discovered. There were a few different property owners, and of course, like I said, the three men or boys, depending on which version of the story you find, that found the original pit did purchase land on the island to make sure that they had control of their claim. At one point, I don't have the exact year in front of me, but at one point, the land of the island was basically segmented into different plots.
Yeah.
It was, let's see if I can find it. I believe it was 34 plots or 32 plots. That were all 32 4-acre lots. Yeah. So basically, it was surveyed and split into those areas in roughly 1761. And
okay, so about 10 years before the boys were there. Okay,
yeah,
that's interesting.
It was a British settlement in the early days, way up north. And then over time, different people have owned the land. At the moment, the people who own the land are primarily one of the most famous treasure hunters on the island, Dan Blankenship, and his family, and a group that's referred to as the Michigan Group, which is the group that is doing the TV show that I saw. So this show, for anyone who's interested in looking into it, it's called The Curse of Oak Island, and it is on the History Channel.
I'm very interested to look this up. I hope it's available in the UK.
For your sake, I hope so, because I found it very interesting.
Yes. Yeah, it sounds very interesting. Like, it sounds like the sort of thing that I'm going to get lost in.
Right? So, that group between the two brothers who are the core of the Michigan Group, Rick and Marty Lagina, as well as their partners, and Dan Blankenship and also Fred Nolan, who were two of the like old school, like they were there back in the 50s and 60s, treasure hunters on the island. Between all of them, they own the majority of the island. They don't own all of it, but they own the majority of it. There's still a few spots that are privately owned. There's 2 permanent homes. So there's 2 permanent homes that people actually live in on a pretty regular basis. And then there's also two cottages on the island that are sort of part-time occupied.
Yeah, I get you. They're holiday homes, for lack of a better word.
Right.
Okay, so kind of interesting with the plots that are privately owned. Like, has anything like even been done on those bits?
So there has been at least some done with cooperation from the landowners. Obviously, none of the Michigan Group, who's the one actively looking on the island right now, wants to, violate someone's property. That's not what they're after. But they have, with permission, gone on people's land and looked at stuff. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because how amazing would that be if those were the ones where the actual treasure was? It's just like, well, I mean, we don't want to dig up our property, so...
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in terms of theories, there's a lot.
Okay.
And
so
they're kind of all over the place.
I mean, it sounds like it, so we'll cover a few of the more interesting ones. So, like, which ones did you find the most interesting? I suppose is the best question.
Okay. I can go. So, I think the ones that I found the most interesting were all of the ones that involved basically some sort of conspiracy theory.
Ooh. I am a sucker for a conspiracy theory. Let's go.
So, basically, the majority of the ideas of where the hidden treasure on Oak Island might have come from center around someone trying to hide a big treasure. Not just like one or two little things, but like a big, massive treasure. And usually it involves, because of the grand scale of creating such a big booby trap, it usually involves someone with a lot of power, a lot of money, and or something that really, really, really they want to keep protected. So one of the theories of what might be buried on the island is the Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. One of the biggest theories that keeps coming up is that the Ark of the Covenant may be buried somewhere on Oak Island, and or the golden menorah that was also taken from the temple. So the idea behind it, there's a couple of different different variations. But most of them involve the Templars.
Makes sense. Very powerful people.
So basically the idea is that through one way or another, the Templar Knights got the Ark of the Covenant and the menorah to Oak Island and hid it there.
Makes sense.
That's one of the...
Would explain why it's so very rigidly protected and how they managed to do it, I guess.
Because they'd have the people and the money at the time, because this would have been back in like the 1500s.
Makes sense.
So...
But right when they were starting, not starting, but had like been established for a bit.
Yes, and there's several different variations of theories of who took it. So one of the ideas is that there's this Scottish Templar Knight who may have been basically the one who took it there and then made sure that it stayed there. Another variation of the theory is that he went there, but he was going there as one of the protectors or like as a scout.
Sure.
And then later it was brought by other explorers. One of the theories that I heard that I think was not necessarily the most unbelievable, because I mean it's so long ago that who knows anymore. But
I get you.
One of the ones that made me kind of go, was that Columbus may have been involved.
Okay.
Right. That Christopher Columbus, as well as two Portuguese brothers. I hope I'm not butchering their name. It's like Corta Real.
Okay.
Two famous explorers, who were brothers. So that particular theory was that Christopher Columbus, who had connections to the Templar Knights through his wife, as well as these two Portuguese explorers who also had connections to the Templar Knights, were in on the whole thing, and that they took Templar Knight treasure, including the Ark of the Covenant and possibly the menorah and other things, to the island, and that the Scottish Templar Knight went there as to sort of stake the claim, set it up, start getting things ready. One of the reasons that this was a theory is that the two Portuguese brothers, the Cordereals, both disappeared.
Oh.
In that area.
When you say in that area, like
they just disappeared. They were exploring and then never seen again.
Okay, so they didn't vanish on the island.
No, not on the island specifically, just in that vicinity. The first one was there up in that general area exploring and then disappeared. And then the second one went to look for his brother and disappeared.
That seems a bit suspicious, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were connected to the Templars, why would they want to get rid of them?
Well, no, not to get rid of them. The theory was that they stayed behind to guard the treasure.
Oh, and the disappearance was a lie, basically. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially, they faked their own death.
Yeah. The idea is that they probably had at least some of the people that were on their crew were Templar Knights as well, or connected to the Templar Knights and had agreed to go on this mission, kind of thing. And so that their ships with their men, they secured the treasure, buried everything the way they were supposed to, booby-trapped it. And then there were Native Americans. Well, okay, it's North America, so they were Native Americans who lived in that area called the Mi'kmaq. I think I'm saying that right. And this person's particular theory was basically that these Templars who had gone there to bury everything and hide everything then, made friends with the locals and married in and sort of blended in and just became part of
the ecosystem.
The ecosystem, so that there would be no evidence that they'd ever been there.
Huh. And that way they could still watch it without anyone being suspicious of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Not the most far-fetched thing I've ever heard. Certainly interesting, but how, I mean, so obviously Christopher Columbus couldn't just stay because he was a well-known person, and his disappearance would be rather bigger news than 2 Portuguese explorers, basically.
Yeah, it would have been an even bigger issue. And there's several other theories on what the money there could have been. One is that it was actually French treasure, that Marie Antoinette perhaps had things hidden there. So during the revolution that ultimately led to Marie Antoinette and her husband's deaths, a lot of Marie Antoinette's jewels went missing. And so one theory is that they were hidden on the island. So according to this theory, which has no documentation, it's just pretty much just a theory, is that Marie Antoinette had one of her maids flee to the island with her jewels. And then she used the French Navy that was in the area to dig the pit and then hid everything. And then in late 2017, they did find possible evidence that could help corroborate this theory a little bit when they found a 500-year-old brooch containing a very, very large garnet.
Interesting. And they believe that might have belonged to her.
It could have been. I mean, they don't have any way to corroborate it, but it's a, maybe, could have been kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things are going to be a maybe, I guess.
True. So there's also some people who say that it might have to do with Francis Bacon and William Shakespeare.
Okay. That one I didn't expect.
Yeah, this one, I haven't actually looked into this one too much, so I don't know as much about this theory.
Right.
But basically, there are a few people who feel that Francis Bacon is the one who really wrote William Shakespeare's plays, and that he was a leader of the Rosicrucians, who are very closely linked to what would later become the Masons.
Sure.
And so someone wrote a book. So in 1953, the book is called The Oak Island Enigma, A History and Inquiry into the Origin of the Money Pit, written by a person named Penn Leary. And he supposedly thinks that the pit is hiding manuscripts indicating that Francis Bacon was William Shakespeare. And he also published a book called The Second Cryptographic Shakespeare in 1990, which included ciphers that he says identifies or can be used against Shakespeare's plays and poems to point at Bacon's authorship instead of Shakespeare.
That's a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's several other people who've also written about it. I won't go into all of them, but yeah. So that's one theory, is that it's actually hidden manuscripts. And part of the reason it's a theory is because at one point they did bring up a scrap of paper out of what they thought might have been a vault underneath the ground. So one theory is that paper might be hidden manuscripts proving that the Francis Bacon thing.
All right. That one is certainly something, is how I'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, conspiracy theories are always like this, I guess. So those all seem kind of interesting. What do you think? Maybe as a good sort of round off, what do you think the most feasible one is so far that you've seen?
I'm not entirely sure which of them is the most feasible. I think for my round off, I want to talk about the one that I think is the most far-fetched.
That's. Oh, you want to go the other way? Okay, yeah. Okay, fine. Let's do that.
So the one I've heard and read about that I think is probably the most far-fetched, not because it's impossible, but just because I feel like of all of the theories, it seems the most improbable, is that it is Mayan and Aztec gold.
Okay.
So there are little tidbits that do point at this being somewhat feasible.
Right.
There's a particular type of clay that's referred to as blue clay that was known to be very valuable in Mayan and Aztec culture. They used it for a lot of more ceremonial and important pottery and stuff like that.
Sure. Okay.
And imagery. And there's a lot of it on Oak Island.
Like a suspiciously large amount?
No, like just it's naturally occurring there. There's a lot of it. So they could, if they'd made it that far north, they could potentially have been harvesting it there. There's also evidence of, I can't remember if it's Aztec or Mayan activity, in parts of southern United States. So like we know that they came further north than might have originally been thought.
Okay.
And they were, they could sail, they did have boats. So is it possible they could have gone all the way up the coast? Yes. It's not necessarily likely, but it is possible. But one theory that I read and saw on the TV show was that the island, which is a very strange shape. So Oak Island is a strange shape, and the two halves of it are very different. One half of it is mostly slate underneath the topsoil, so just layers and layers and layers of slate. The other island, or other half of the island, is something called anhydrite.
Okay. Which
is a type of soil that occurs when like all the salt and calcium deposits from the ocean water basically start to solidify into the dirt that's already there and makes it really, really hard. So the two So the two halves of the island don't really match up with each other. They're not identical.
Okay.
So it's almost like they were two separate land masses at one point, or two separate sources at least, that came up and formed the island. So this one theory is that they actually are two separate islands, and that they had a small divide between the two of them, very small. The Mayan theory Mayan/Aztec theory that I heard and followed up with a little bit more research on was that basically the Aztecs showed up and dammed off either side where the two islands were. So basically they made themselves a dry area in the middle. And we know they had the technology to do that.
Yeah.
And then they dug tunnels.
Hid things in that dry area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In the dry area, and then dug tunnels into the sides of the two islands.
Yeah.
And then once they were done, they filled it all in and covered it up so that it was like the two had been connected.
Interesting.
The idea was that they might have hidden it there because of like the blue clay, like they went there originally and then they hid some of their gold at some point. And so that's one of the many theories, and for me personally, I feel like it's the most far-fetched, not only because of the sheer amount of work that would have required.
Absolutely, yeah.
But also because even though we do know the Aztecs and Mayans got further north than we originally thought, to my knowledge, there's not a lot of evidence that they got all the way up to Nova Scotia.
Not to mention that you'd expect there to be some record of an island that was in two pieces and suddenly in a full single island.
Well, you would think, except that that would have been happening, I mean, so many hundreds of years ago. that even if there had been records, they would not necessarily still exist.
That's true. Okay, it's still, I don't know whether whether I could believe that. Like, stitching an island together, that's incredibly and you know, like, there's no evidence to say that would even hold up for however long it has.
Yeah, I did say that I personally think it's the least likely.
Yeah, but it sounds fun.
Yes, it's a fun idea, but I don't think it's as likely as some of the others. I think if there is treasure hidden on that island, that something like the Templars, or one theory also that I mentioned very briefly earlier, is that it's pirate treasure. Because pirates were known for being active in that area during the, prior to when the kids found the supposed buried treasure. But the only caveat to that is, would pirates have bothered building such an elaborate booby trap? And I don't know that the answer is yes.
That's fair.
Not unless it was some sort of like epically large hidden treasure chest.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, yeah, you're right. It's unlikely, but it's certainly a very interesting thing which has been very elaborately set up. I kind of like the idea of it being the Templars, because I always like the ideas of the Templars. Whether that's feasible or as believable, I don't know. It could just be random people building elaborate traps, but more people with know-how and power does make more sense, at least somewhat. I also did try to have a look briefly while we were talking. I can't seem to find anywhere that I can watch it right now.
Sucks. I know, I found it on Netflix.
It might be on the UK one. I'll have to have a look.
I think the History Channel has a YouTube.
There might be clips there. I doubt there'll be full episodes, but I can have a look. See what I can find.
I do know I have found some History Channel shows on Amazon also.
Yeah, that'd be my next place to look, because I would very much like to binge this, because it sounds really interesting, I've got to be honest.
Yeah.
Apparently there's like 7 series, which is...
Netflix only has season 3.
Okay.
So that's
a bit
all
of a
I've
weird
seen.
One to have.
I know, it's so random. But they only have season 3, so yeah, I'm also trying to figure out, like, where can I watch more? Because I finished season 3.
And now you need the rest.
Exactly.
And then once you've watched all the episodes, you're going to go to the island and you're going to start searching.
No. No.
No? Fair enough. Okay, well, that's a very interesting topic. Hopefully no one else dies for the treasure to be found. That would be fun.
Yeah, actually, he didn't die. Technically, he didn't die actively looking for the treasure. He was searching, but not like in the hole or anything, digging around. Dan Blankenship, who's one of the old school treasure hunters from back in the 60s, passed away earlier this year. Now, technically, he was still searching. Whether that counts per the supposed curse or not, who's to say?
I think it's very dubious, but we'll find out, I guess. Alright, then. Well, on that eluding note, I guess we'll wrap up for this week. If you want to find out more about the show, like I said, it's on the History Channel, which I assume is easier for most of our listeners who are American, probably, to listen to.
Yeah, it could
watch, I suppose. Yeah. I will keep an eye out for it, and yeah, because I'm very interested now. That's very interesting. So yeah, we'll see you all next week with 2 more weeks of spoopy goodness, because we're halfway through October already.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so none of you can see it, but I'm very happily clapping my hands together with creepy glee.
Yeah. Heather is almost steepling her fingers. It's amazing. So, yes, we will enjoy more scary, horror, Halloween-related things. And we'll see you all next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Geek Thyself. Don't forget to check out all the other amazing content on the Nerdsmith Network. If you have any questions for either of us, you can get in contact with us on Twitter at geek_thyself.
You can also email us at geekthyself@nerdsmith.org. And please don't forget to go to iTunes and leave us a review, or also go anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
We'll be back next week with another informative and fun episode.
And until then, don't forget to geek thyself.